Because of the safety margin contained within the net performance figures, it is the net performance rather than the gross performance which is written into the airplane flight manual for use in airline operations. This means that the published data within the flight manual ensures that for over 99.99994% of the time, the performance achieved will be better than published. In order to determine this performance standard, the authorities will not, of course, carry out 1,000,000 landings or takeoffs. Rather, they will have statistical data stretching back for many years and from many aeroplanes. In the case of landing, this data will be plotted on a histogram, with landing distance on the bottom axis and frequency of landings on the left axis, as shown. There will of course always be a few good pilots who carry out very short landings, just as there will be a few who carry out very long landings. But most landings will of course be of a similar distance to that shown by the top of the bell shape on the curve. This is the average performance, which can be effectively considered as the gross performance. Through statistical analysis, the authorities are then able to extrapolate what will be the worst landing in 1,000,000 landings. This then becomes the level for the net performance. There will be a particular value that separates the net and gross landing distances. This value is known as the safety margin or safety factor. Knowing this safety factor enables us to make the necessary adjustments to gross performance data so we may calculate the net performance data. We will discuss this in more detail later. If we now return to our landing illustration, we can see a little more clearly how to quantify the net performance. Shown here is the gross landing distance. To find the net landing distance, we multiply the gross distance by the safety factor. You will be required to do this on a number of occasions throughout this course and in your aircraft performance exam. It is therefore important to understand where the safety factor has originated from. Most Class A aeroplane flight manual data has net performance. But for many Class B aeroplanes, the flight manual data is gross performance, and it will be up to you to calculate the net performance so that you can determine the actual level of safety. Be careful though. Net performance has several other names that you may come across which mean the same thing. These are scheduled performance, planned performance, or dispatch performance. In the last part of this lesson, we will confine ourselves to recognizing the difference between the gross and net performance in different phases of flight. You will recall that we calculated net performance by adjusting the gross performance by a given safety factor, always remembering that net performance is always inferior to gross performance. Shown on screen is a takeoff using gross performance data, i.e., the gross takeoff distance. Remember that net performance will always be inferior. A takeoff of inferior performance would mean you use more runway. Therefore, the net takeoff distance is longer than the gross takeoff distance, as shown. Let us now examine gross and net performance in a climb. Shown on screen is an aeroplane's gross climb gradient. From what you have learned, do you think net performance gradient will be at position 1 or position 2? Remember, net performance is always inferior to gross performance. Click on the number you think is the correct one. the net climb gradient would be position 2. Let us look at one more example. If the landing we see here represents the net landing distance, then will landing 1 or landing 2 be the gross landing distance? The gross landing distance is landing number 1. Hopefully, you will now be able to manually adjust the gross performance values using a given safety factor to obtain the net performance values, or vice versa. As a general rule, you will have to do this any time you use Class B performance data. This will be covered and practiced when we encounter such situations, but you may need to come back to this lesson to refresh your knowledge of the core differences between the different performance standards.